the Senate approved $95 billion for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And so, though I really don't like AP News, they do have a pretty good breakdown of everything that's in the bill pretty well. Admittedly, this is still the Senate just passed it. Congress is saying that they're not going to pass it, so fingers crossed it doesn't go through all the way, but who knows. But right now, spending to Ukraine, $60 billion going to Ukraine. Mind you, $20 billion for a wall under Trump was insane. I mean, who could imagine spending $20 billion at one time like that? $60 billion, though, going to Ukraine, no big deal.
They wouldn't even agree to
do what?
They wouldn't even agree to $4 billion for the wall.
Yes. Now, of course, we'll talk about the border here in a little bit. There's a story about that too coming up. But $14 billion to allow Ukraine to rearm itself through purchasing of new weapons and munitions. So again, just going to Lockheed Martin and all the industrial war complex companies. So just $14 billion being handed through them. $15 billion to support military training and intelligence sharing. $8 billion will go to help their government continue basic operations. Now, they do say there's a prohibition on money going towards pensions, because that was a big issue in the last bill that was tied into the border bill, where they were going to actually pay for people's pensions in Ukraine, which was kind of funny since we can barely afford, anything over here at the point. I mean, let's face it, look at how much debt we have in Social Security when it comes to the national debt as a whole. But they took that out. But there's also $1.6 billion to help the Ukraine's private sector, and obviously that is vague enough to where you have no idea what that could possibly ever mean. So obviously, Mitch McConnell, obviously is a big push with this. I think it was 22 Republicans who voted for this, right? I think in the Senate.
I forget the number.
I think it was 22 Republicans voted for this bill, mind you. So it shows you how terrible the Republicans in the Senate right now are.
Your boy Tillis was on board for it.
Just don't even remind me. I unfortunately helped get that man elected. I hate the fact I helped out, but especially now. Well, I don't know. I'd rather have him there than Democrats, but this isn't much better. This is why we have to make sure. I want him out, at least when the primaries come around next time. But then we have to Israel, about $14 billion to Israel. Now, obviously, it's all based going to defensive measures. $4 billion going to the air defense, with $1.2 billion for the Iron Beam, which is just an awesome name for that, by the way. It's the laser weapon system that intercepts missiles and everything like that. $2.5 billion for military operations in the region, and then $9 billion to humanitarian assistance to provide food, water, shelter, and medical care to civilians in Gaza. So, talk about funding both sides of the war here. I mean, I know they're civilians, and we don't like when civilians are harmed. But can you imagine if, while we were in World War II, we just said, "Hey, quick, let's just send food and supplies over to Berlin"? Like, you wouldn't do that. It makes no sense that we're doing that now. But it's also worth saying, I think they say it costs well over $100,000 just to shoot down one rocket that Hamas fires into Israel. So Israel can sit there and not have to worry too much about pushing the war too hard, because we keep funding their defense system, even though it makes no financial sense for us to be covering the defenses for Israel, because they're firing $50 to $100 rockets, and we're spending over $100,000 to take down just one of them. And the only reason Israel can hold back at all when it comes to this war is because we're the ones covering the entire expense for their defense. And no country should be able to sustain that sort of defensive measure to rockets that are just that little in cost. And now, of course, we're using drones, which is even less expensive too. So, there's that as well. And then what do you know? We got around $8 billion going over to places like Taiwan.
Before you get to the next one, what are the odds that any of that money actually gets to the civilians that need it?
Lean forward a bit. I can't hear you.
I said, what are the odds that any of that money?
I think you disconnected your mic. I think you were saying what are the odds it actually gets to any of the civilians, and the chances are absolutely zero because they sat there and, we paid basically for the pipes and stuff like that in Gaza as is. And what did they do? They took those water pipes and turned them into missiles. So even if we intentionally gave them not the money, but just the resources, they would just turn around and turn that into weapons anyway. So it doesn't really even matter even in that respect. You're still off. Let's see if you can't figure this out. When you think you got working, just speak again, and when I hear you, I'll stop talking myself. Now, again, there is $8 billion also, again, going to the Indo-Pacific to deter aggression by Chinese. I'll be honest, I am not for foreign spending when it comes to sending it to these countries for the most part. But the only one that I think makes any remote sense actually might be Taiwan, considering the fact of every chip that makes all of our phones and all of our computers run, for the most part, are being made in Taiwan. If we lose Taiwan, we do lose one, like just a massive, massive resource, not just to us on the world scale, but also just as private citizens, right? The prices for everything you buy as electronic will skyrocket if anything ever happens to Taiwan. So you can make some small justification probably for sending over some resources to Taiwan. But Israel and Ukraine, I'm sorry, I still do not like any money going to either of them. I really don't. You still can't hear you. Check that voice meter thing, and that will let you know when it's showing it. Click on, or check the Zoom thing to make sure it's not saying you're muted because your mic went off, or make sure it's still showing it coming out of your mic. So if you pull up your Zoom and hit the arrow on the microphone button, make sure it's checked under your microphone, because sometimes it will auto click off if your mic gets disconnected.
How about now?
I hear it now.
I just got rid of voice meter altogether. Does it sound that different?
A little bit quieter, so you might need to turn up your gain just a little bit. Come on, I don't have tech issues on my side for once, and now here you are.
How about now? Is that better?
Yeah, I think it's good enough.
So let's go back to the civilian thing. So you saw the IDF went in and rescued 2 Israeli hostages.
Yeah.
And did you see where they were being held?
Was it a hospital or something?
They were being held by citizens.
Ah.
So again, where's the money going, and who are we actually helping?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. People have leaked out like their television programs, like their kids programs and stuff. And on their kids program, like their version of like Sesame Street, it's slowly showing like stereotypical images of Jews and showing them being shot and killed by like other puppets and things. Like, I mean, they literally teach their children from birth, you need to kill the Jews. It's a terrible and awful, awful thing. Obviously, those children aren't to blame, but at the same time, we also have to recognize what you're dealing with there. And that is literally an 8-year-old will pick up a gun and try to kill you if you try to go in there. How do you fight a war like that? I mean, you can't fight a war like that and there not be terrible casualties. I mean, this is why I think for the most part, we're all kind of against war in general if we can help it, because it is absolutely awful. It's not like the movies. You're not going to have like 2 20-year-old men, just buff, fighting it out to see who's best. No, you're going to have instances where 8-year-olds are going to pick up guns and try to shoot somebody, and you're going to have mass civilian casualties. It's absolutely awful. But the reality is that's what you have to deal with. There is no other way really around it at the moment. I mean, how much concessions has Israel made to Gaza at this point? I mean, well, for my entire life at least, it's been nonstop.
So the whole thing is, we want a ceasefire, where there was a ceasefire on October 6th.
Yes, who broke it? And they'll go, it wasn't the citizens who broke it. Okay, no, but it's still coming out of Gaza, and the citizens haven't dealt with their own problems. I'm sorry, the people in Israel shouldn't have to deal with the problems that the people of Gaza won't fix. If the people of Gaza really don't like Hamas, then they have to fix that. Or else Israel's going to have to deal with it themselves because they can't just sit there and let that happen to them. If missiles were coming over from the Mexican side of the border and hitting United States cities left and right almost every single day, you betcha we would demolish them. It wouldn't matter if it was the cartels doing it. We would go in there and solve the issue ourselves because no country would allow that to happen. But obviously, for some reason, we treat Israel so differently than like every other country. And it's so weird how we end up kind of handling this.
So this spending bill went down in the Senate already, and our senators are ostensibly elected to represent the state from which they hail. So we can argue whether they're truly representing the best interests of their state or not. But what's your argument against, well, Israel is the bastion of democracy and freedom, the only bastion of democracy and freedom in that region. So the money has to go there in order to protect the interest of the United States and those individual states. So what's your argument against that?
My argument against it is the fact that bastion of freedom would have conquered most of the Middle East had we not held them by the leash. My thing is that for the most part, when all these other countries attacked them back like in the was it 70s or 80s? I think it was like towards the end of the 70s, right? When like Jordan and them all kind of started teaming up trying to take down Israel, and Israel fought them off. It was us who stepped in and said, no, 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 you can't take over all of their lands. That's evil. You can't just take over all of their lands after beating them in a war. And so they took, of course, a big part of it was they took areas similar to the West Bank through defensive war after defensive war. If you sat there and got American out of the equation, and got the UN especially out of the equation, Israel would have taken over most of the Middle East and probably, they would be a much larger powerhouse than they currently are, which I think would be for the betterment of the Middle East.
But that didn't happen. So now they are the dam holding the water back in that region.
I think if we take away the money that we're sending in to handle their defense grid, they would end up just doing a full invasion into the West Bank, even more so than they're already doing. Demolish everything that's there, push everyone out, take over it, full control, and just adopt it as part of Israel and say to every other country around, if you do the same to us, we will conquer you as well. Because even without our resources, Israel is an absolute powerhouse when it comes to their technology and what they've done militarily. Their tanks are some of the best tanks in the entire world. They have, a very, very powerful air force that's very well trained, more well trained than anything in the entirety of the Middle East. I think you take away our resources that we're handing them in the first place. And mind you, I don't think that they shouldn't be allowed to purchase stuff from us. If they want to buy weapons from us, if they want to buy tanks from us, if they want to buy jets from us, well, that's a fair trade. I don't think there's a problem with that. They're an ally. If they want to buy our resource, buy stuff that we sell, by all means. But just giving them taxpayer dollars when we already are at just massive debt currently seems to be just financially irresponsible for the most part. And I don't think they'll sit there. Again, I really do think there would actually be more peace in the Middle East if we let them just have at it and just wiped our hands of it and said, hey, you're off the leash. Do whatever you need to do to survive in that hellhole of a place. I mean, just do whatever you need to do. And I think they would take control over things a lot more efficiently than how they've currently been. Because again, all these treaties they constantly sign that let Hamas live, that let these terrorist organizations live, is because we tell them to. It's not because they want to do it.
So you got your answer for that one. Let's go to Russia. Last time we talked, Tucker hadn't done his interview, and so maybe you didn't know the entire history from the year zero to till now of Russia. But what I mean, what's your argument there? So the argument from McConnell et al. Is it's our resources that are keeping Russia from taking over all of Eastern Europe.
I mean, I will say this after that interview, I can't believe I'm even saying this. I mean, this is going to sound awful. Nikki Haley might have been somewhat right. She did say that, oh, well, Putin wants more than Ukraine. He wants, all the Soviet Empire back. And he did say, well, guess what? All of that's technically our territory. So maybe she was a little bit right on what he would like. Now, I still don't think it's really that big of a deal, mostly because, again, you're telling me Germany can't handle any of this? You're telling me the UK can't handle any of this? You're telling me France can't handle any of this? Why are we the ones who have to hold everyone up constantly? It just seems to make no sense to me. And again, here's the thing. I've said this countless times. If we were in a better financial position, I would have no problem with us imposing our will on top of, across all of Earth for the most part. I really wouldn't. I don't think it is morally wrong for us to be the world police. I think it's financially stupid for us to be the world police. I mean, actually, I just typed this in real quick because I always like having this. This is the current national debt. Now, I guess you can't see it over there, but let me just pull this out a little bit. Okay, so $34 trillion for our national debt at the moment. If you have, it's great to give to charity. It's amazing to give to charity. But if your family was in $1 million of debt, you wouldn't be giving to charity constantly. It might be the right thing to do, but you can't afford to do it. So I do not see why we would sit there and constantly keep funding all of these wars after all of these wars when we can't even get ourselves together. It makes no sense for us to tell the world how it should behave when we at this point, and I'm just going to say it, I think we're a failed nation. I don't think we're truly a successful nation anymore. I think at this point, we are a failed nation that I hope will one day be able to recover. But you can't look at the national debt of this level, inflation of this level, the sheer impact of stuff like the fact that our dollar is tied to absolutely nothing anymore, and say we are not a failed nation. I mean, half the country hates the other half too. I mean, I think the joke was that if everything that's happening in America was happening in another country, America would invade that country to save them. So I fail to see how we have any role to play in Europe.
It's a bit ironic that we're going to borrow money from China to give to Taiwan.
I know, right?
That's a bit ironic, but so legitimately, where will we determine? And well, let me go to a couple of things. First off, I think it's funny that you brought up France and Germany as your illustration to defend against an onslaught from Russia. France is going to roll over, and the Germans have already tried it, and we saw that ended up. So you pick two terrible examples, but I guess that's all we have to fall back on. But
hey, you're picking France as we remember them in World War II. There was a time when they were the best of the best.
That's been a while.
Why do you think they're importing so many immigrants? They need someone to throw to the front lines. They're going to use a Soviet strategy.
But at any rate, so you don't see any American interest whatsoever in putting that gate into Eastern Europe.
I see American interest. I just do not see it. I don't see the pros outweighing the cons. I see things getting worse as we constantly interfere with some of these issues, not better. And there was a time when when I think our intervention would actually improve things. But do you really trust the politicians we have today to properly do it in such a way that would be for the betterment of the nation as a whole, or for the betterment of their partners, of course, when it comes to the military-industrial war complex, as well as just their own pocketbooks themselves? I think a lot of our politicians look at things, for one, not as an America first interest, obviously, but more as a global interest. And I don't think they really care about America in the first place, to a point where whatever decisions they make are not going to be for the betterment of us whatsoever. So, I mean, if we had better leaders, then maybe by all means, I would feel more comfortable about it. But what have they done in Ukraine that would give you any thought to say, oh yeah, they're doing the right thing currently? Because that's kind of my issue. What have we done in Ukraine that's given us any hope that what they're doing is actually going to work in the long haul, and not just a money funneling operation?
Not just Ukraine. What have they done anywhere? Gives us But what we're looking at is probably the largest money laundering scheme in the history of the earth.
When an entire American dollar at this point is the largest laundering scheme in the history of the earth. I mean, we just keep printing and printing and printing and then handing out all this money over to foreign countries and saying, hey, look, we're giving you all this money, so you have to use our dollars, which of course keeps propping up our own currency, and eventually that collapses. You can't keep doing that and that succeed.
Well,
Eventually
and then
we will be the
look at how
Weimar
many of those
Republic.
dollars. Look at how many of those dollars are finding their way back into political action committees, into actual straight up campaign contributions, and just and especially into the quote unquote charitable organizations that the politicians have on the side. But look
Oh
at
yeah.
all the money that's funneling back from this right back into their pockets.
Now, I will say this in defense of the people you say, when people say, oh, well, war is the biggest expenditure we have, and it's war is the reason why we're in such debt. You look right here, it's actually really not the case. When you look at, how much of the debt is from defense and war, $859 billion, which is definitely a lot. Definitely a lot. And it's probably really, honestly, a lot of stuff is probably higher, to be perfectly honest, but just take it for what we got here. Social Security, 1.5 trillion. Medicare and Medicaid, 1.7 trillion. So when people, again, these people always like to say, well, military is our biggest expenditure. No, it's not. Not even by a long shot. It's literally less than half Medicaid and Medicare.
You have grabbed right a hold of the fourth rail. You go.